The day nearly 3 million bees turned a luxury country club into a scene straight out of a disaster movie. Everybody pointed their finger at me. Parents were carrying screaming kids across the parking lot. Lifeguards were blowing whistles like the world was ending. And wealthy members who normally spent their afternoons sipping wine beside an infinity pool were diving into their SUVs and peeling out of there as fast as they could. According to them, I was the villain. According to the local newspaper, I was a reckless beekeeper. According to my lawyer, I should probably stop smiling every time somebody mentioned the incident. But here's the thing nobody wanted to talk about. None of that would have happened if they hadn't bulldozed my meadow first. My name is Ethan Mercer, and for almost 12 years I lived on a quiet stretch of farmland just outside a town called Redstone Valley. It wasn't a fancy property. No gates. No security guards. No golf carts driving around pretending to be police officers. Just 16 acres of rolling ground that had belonged to my family since my grandmother bought it back in the 70s. Most people who drove past thought it looked messy. They saw wildflowers instead of manicured landscaping. They saw bees instead of decorative fountains. They saw nature doing what nature does. But to me, every inch of that land meant something. My grandmother, Eleanor, had spent decades collecting heritage flower varieties from old farms all across the state. She treated seeds the way some people treat family heirlooms. When she passed away, she left everything to me, along with one request. Don't let them pave it. At the time I laughed, because who in the world would want to pave over a wildflower meadow? Turns out my grandmother understood people better than I did. The flowers stretched across most of the eastern section of my property. Every spring they exploded into color. Purple lupins, black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, milkweed. Hundreds of varieties working together like some giant living painting. The bees loved it. The butterflies loved it. The hummingbirds loved it. Honestly, I think even the neighbors loved it, though most of them would never admit it. My honey business started as a hobby and somehow became my full-time job. Every Saturday morning I'd load jars into my truck and head to farmers markets across 3 counties. By noon I'd usually be sold out. Customers would ask what made the honey taste different, and I'd tell them the truth. It tasted like the meadow. Every flower added something unique. Every season created a different flavor. It wasn't just honey. It was a snapshot of the land itself. About 5 years before everything fell apart, a private country club opened next to my property. The place was called Silver Ridge Athletic Club. If you've ever met people with more money than common sense, you already know exactly what kind of place this was. Huge pools, tennis courts, luxury cabanas. Membership fees that cost more than some used cars. At first I figured we'd end up in a constant war. Rich developers and farmers usually don't become best friends. Surprisingly, things worked out. Their members loved looking at the meadow. Wedding photographers would constantly ask permission to take pictures near the flowers. Club guests would stop by my roadside stand and buy honey. For years we coexisted peacefully. Then the club started getting bigger. Every summer, more members joined. Every summer, more luxury vehicles appeared. Every summer the parking lot became more crowded. Looking back, I can see the warning signs now. Little comments. Casual jokes. Board members mentioning how much extra space they needed. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. At the time I didn't think much about it. People complain about parking everywhere. I figured it was their problem. Then one weekend my sister called from Colorado. She'd recently undergone surgery and needed some help around the house for a few days. I packed a bag, left my farm manager in charge, and drove out to Denver. I was gone 6 days. 6 days. That's all it took. The moment I turned into my driveway on the way home, I knew something was wrong. At first I couldn't figure out what my brain was seeing. The landscape felt different. Empty somehow. Then I reached the crest of the hill, and my stomach dropped. Half my eastern meadow was gone. Completely gone. The flowers had been scraped away. The topsoil had been removed. Fresh asphalt-covered ground that had taken years to cultivate. Bright white parking lines stretched across what used to be fields of blooming wildflowers. And parked neatly inside those spaces sat luxury SUVs, pickup trucks, and sports cars as if they'd always belonged there. For a few seconds I honestly couldn't move. I just sat behind the steering wheel staring at it. There are moments in life when anger arrives slowly. This wasn't one of them. This felt like getting hit by a truck. I jumped out, walked straight across the property line, and started looking for survey markers. By the time I found the first one, my hands were shaking. Because deep down I already knew exactly what had happened. And as I followed those markers one by one, measuring distances and comparing coordinates, the truth became impossible to ignore. They hadn't accidentally crossed onto my land. They hadn't made a small mistake. Silver Ridge Athletic Club had deliberately paved nearly an acre of my property while I was out of town, and the man responsible was about to learn that some things can't be bought, negotiated, or paved over. The next morning, I walked into Silver Ridge Athletic Club carrying a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Inside were property deeds, county surveys, tax records, aerial photographs, and every piece of documentation proving exactly where my land began and where theirs ended. I wasn't looking for a fight. At least that's what I kept telling myself on the drive over. The truth was I was furious, and the only thing keeping me calm was the fact that I knew I was right. The club manager pointed me toward the executive offices where I found Garrett Holloway, the club president, sitting behind a massive desk that probably cost more than my first truck. Garrett had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He made his money developing luxury subdivisions and had built a reputation around turning open land into expensive real estate. To him, every field was a future parking lot, and every tree was simply something standing in the way of profit. He leaned back in his chair when I walked in and said, "Ethan, what can I do for you?" Like we were old friends. I dropped the survey maps onto his desk. "You can start by explaining why your club paved over nearly an acre of my property." He barely looked down. "I think there may be some confusion regarding the boundary." I opened the maps and pointed directly at the survey lines. "There isn't." For a few seconds, he studied the documents. Then he shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like we were discussing a misplaced lawn chair instead of years of my work being destroyed. "Well," he said, "if there was an overlap, we can compensate you." Compensate me. I remember staring at him because I genuinely couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You destroyed heritage flowers that took over a decade to establish. We'll pay market value. You wiped out bee habitat. We'll pay market value. You stole my land. We'll pay market value." Finally, I leaned forward and asked, "What exactly is the market value of something that can't be replaced?" That was the first moment his smile disappeared. He wasn't used to hearing no. Men like Garrett built entire careers around convincing people that everything had a price. We argued for nearly an hour. When I left, I gave him one simple choice. Remove the parking lot, restore the land, and make it right within 30 days. Otherwise, things were going to get ugly. He laughed as I walked out. Actually laughed. "Talk to our attorneys," he called after me. "They'll explain reality." The next month taught me a valuable lesson about powerful people. When they think they can get away with something, they rarely stop at the original offense. They double down. They justify it. They convince themselves they're the victim. Instead of fixing the problem, Silver Ridge expanded it. New signs appeared advertising premium Meadowview parking. Members paid extra to park on the land they had stolen from me. Every time I drove past, I could see luxury vehicles lined up across what used to be wildflower habitat. It felt like watching strangers dance on my grandmother's grave. Meanwhile, my bees were struggling. The loss of nearly an acre of forage hit harder than I expected. Honey production dropped. Colony behavior changed. Some hives became more aggressive. Others spent longer searching for food. One evening, I was standing beside the remaining meadow watching thousands of bees leave their hives when an old friend named Russell stopped by. Russell had been keeping bees for almost 40 years. If bees had a university professor, it would have been him. We sat on overturned buckets drinking coffee while I explained everything that had happened. He listened quietly, then looked toward the parking lot and said something that changed everything. "Those bees are going to look for food somewhere." I nodded. "I know. And the closest place with sugar, fruit, drinks, and people eating outdoors." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. For several seconds, we just stared toward the country club. That's when the idea began forming. Not revenge exactly. More like consequences. Perfectly legal consequences. Over the next 2 weeks, I started making phone calls. Lots of phone calls. Beekeepers talk. It's a small community. Before long, I had spoken with dozens of people across neighboring counties. Many of them needed temporary hive locations. Many of them had colonies producing strong numbers. Many of them loved the idea of earning agricultural lease income. By the end of the month, agreements had been signed. Flatbeds started arriving. One by one, rows of beehives appeared along the edge of my property. Then more arrived. Then more. Some mornings I'd wake up and count new boxes I didn't remember seeing the day before. By the time everything was finished, 60 active hives stretched along the boundary line. Nearly 3 million bees. Every hive placed legally. Every permit secured. Every agricultural regulation followed to the letter. My attorney reviewed everything twice. Then a third time just to be safe. You're technically doing nothing wrong, he told me. Technically, I asked. He smiled. Let's just say I wouldn't schedule any outdoor picnics next door. At first nothing happened. A few members complained about seeing more bees. Some posted angry comments online. Garrett called me twice demanding I remove the hives. I politely informed him that agricultural operations were protected under county zoning laws. The conversations became increasingly entertaining. Your bees are bothering our members. They're honeybees, Garrett. They gather food. They're everywhere. Funny, they used to have an acre of flowers to visit. Then Memorial Day weekend arrived. Every country club lives for Memorial Day. It's the unofficial beginning of summer. Silver Ridge planned one of its biggest events of the year. Hundreds of members attended. There were catered buffets, outdoor bars, fruit stations, ice cream stands, desserts, and enough sugary drinks to keep a small city awake for a week. Around noon, I was checking equipment near my hives when I noticed something unusual. The air seemed thicker. The movement patterns had changed. Streams of bees were heading in the same direction, toward the club. By 1 o'clock, my phone started ringing. By 1:30, the videos started appearing online. Thousands of bees had descended onto the outdoor dining areas. Not attacking, not swarming aggressively, simply feeding. But when hundreds of people who aren't used to insects suddenly find themselves surrounded by thousands of bees, panic doesn't care about biology. It only cares about fear. Guests abandoned tables. Drinks spilled. Children screamed. Lifeguards cleared pools. One video showed a businessman diving into a cabana and pulling the curtains shut like he was hiding from a tornado. Another showed several members sprinting across the parking lot while carrying folding chairs over their heads. Looking back now, some of the footage was honestly hilarious. At the time, however, Silver Ridge wasn't laughing. Garrett called me that evening so angry he could barely form complete sentences. Your bees attacked our event. No, I replied. They attended your event. People got stung. People get stung when they panic around bees. This is your fault. I paused for a second. Garrett, where exactly do you think those bees used to find food? Silence. Then he hung up. The problem didn't disappear after Memorial Day. It got worse. Every outdoor gathering attracted more bees. Every snack bar became a magnet. Every spilled soda created a miniature feeding station. The club hired pest control companies. They couldn't spray near pools or food service areas. They tried smoke systems, fans, repellents, special traps. Nothing worked. The bees simply kept doing what bees do, searching for resources that used to exist in the meadow they had destroyed. By midsummer, complaints exploded. Membership cancellations started rolling in. Social media posts went viral. Local news stations picked up the story. And behind closed doors, something even more damaging was beginning to happen. Lawyers were getting involved. Insurance companies were asking questions. Investigators were reviewing environmental reports. And Garrett Holloway was about to discover that the most expensive consequences weren't coming from my bees at all. They were coming from his own decisions. What finally broke Garrett wasn't the bees. That's the part most people get wrong. The bees were embarrassing. The bees were expensive. The bees made headlines and ruined pool parties and turned luxury weekends into exercises in crowd control. But embarrassment heals. Money can be replaced. What Garrett couldn't survive was the paper trail. Once the lawsuits started piling up, investigators began digging into everything. Club members wanted refunds. Parents demanded explanations. A few guests claimed they had suffered injuries during the evacuations. The insurance company launched a full review, and suddenly people who had never cared about a wildflower meadow were asking very detailed questions about why it had disappeared in the first place. One afternoon, my attorney called and told me to sit down. Apparently, county environmental officials had discovered that several protected pollinator plant species had been destroyed during the parking lot expansion. Nothing criminal, but enough regulatory trouble to make corporate lawyers lose sleep. The insurance company then reached a conclusion that probably gave Garrett his first real nightmare in years. They determined the ongoing bee-related disruptions were directly connected to the club's own decision to eliminate existing forage habitat. In other words, the club had helped create the very conditions causing the problem. Coverage was denied. Suddenly, every complaint, every refund, every legal expense, every canceled membership became Silver Ridge's responsibility. No safety net. No insurance rescue. Just consequences. The funny thing about arrogant people is that they always believe they'll be the last ones forced to compromise. Then reality arrives with a bill. Garrett called me in late August. Gone was the smug confidence. Gone was the polished executive voice. He sounded tired. Older somehow. "Ethan," he said quietly, "we need to talk." A few weeks earlier, I would have enjoyed hearing that. Instead, I mostly felt exhausted. Conflict has a way of draining everyone involved. We met in a conference room overlooking the very parking lot that started the whole mess. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Garrett looked out the window and said, "What do you want?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the answer had never changed. The same thing I wanted on day one. Over the next several hours, attorneys negotiated details. The final agreement required the club to remove every section of parking lot built on my land. They would pay for soil restoration. They would fund replanting efforts. They would compensate me for lost honey production, damaged habitat, legal expenses, and future recovery costs. Every single dollar. No discounts. No favors. No shortcuts. A month later, construction crews returned. This time they weren't paving. They were tearing pavement out. I stood there one morning with a cup of coffee watching excavators break apart asphalt that should never have existed. The sound was strangely satisfying. Chunk by chunk, the parking lot disappeared. Underneath it sat the same earth they had buried months earlier. Damaged, compacted, wounded, but still there. Restoration took nearly a year. We brought in soil specialists, native plant experts, volunteers from local conservation groups. My neighbors helped. Even some former club members showed up. One elderly woman spent an entire weekend planting milkweed because she remembered seeing monarch butterflies there years earlier. Little by little, the meadow returned. Not exactly the same. Some things never come back completely. But life has a remarkable ability to heal when people stop getting in its way. The following spring, the first major bloom arrived. I remember walking through the field at sunrise. The flowers stretched across the landscape again, moving gently in the morning breeze. Then I heard it. That familiar sound. Thousands of bees humming above the blossoms. For the first time in over a year, they had a proper home again. I stood there thinking about my grandmother. Thinking about that promise I made without fully understanding it. Don't let them pave it. Back then I thought she was talking about flowers. Now I think she was talking about something bigger. Maybe she understood that once people learn they can take something from you without consequences, they'll keep taking until nothing remains. A few weeks later, I ran into Garrett at a local charity event. It was our first conversation since the settlement. He looked at me, glanced away, then finally said, "You know, all of this would have been cheaper if we'd just listened to you." I smiled. Yeah, it would have. Then I walked away. No dramatic speech. No victory lap. No need. The meadow was blooming again. That was enough. Still, every now and then someone asks whether I regret bringing in all those beehives. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe there was a better way. Maybe there wasn't. What I do know is that nobody at Silver Ridge ever tried taking my land again. And to this day, whenever summer arrives and the flowers begin to bloom, people still stop by the farm stand to buy honey and hear the story. Some think I was justified. Others think I went too far. So now I'm curious what you think. If a powerful organization destroyed something you'd spent years building, would you have fought back the same way? Or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story about property rights, consequences, and a few million very motivated bees, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who believes money can solve every problem. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money at all. Sometimes it's simply letting people live with the consequences of their own choices.